I remember the night I almost missed the little match seller. It was a bitterly cold Christmas Eve, the kind of night when the stars look like they've been cut from ice and pinned to the sky, and the wind has sharp edges that slip under coats and sting cheeks. From high above the city, my sleigh skimmed along the dark currents of air. Below me, the streets twisted and shone with patches of frozen snow. Windows glowed with yellow light. Chimneys puffed soft smoke. Behind those windows, tables were set. Fires burned, and laughter rose up as warm as the light itself. I know those evenings well. I've seen the way families draw close around a table. How children press their noses to the glass in hopes of seeing my sleigh. How candles flicker on tree branches. It is a beautiful sight. But what I remember most are the shadows between those pools of light. That year, as I flew over the old part of the city, the neighborhood with narrow alleys and cobblestone streets, something tugged at me, a small, thin feeling, like a candle struggling in a draft. I've learned to pay attention to those feelings, so I pulled gently on the reins, and the reindeer dipped lower, their hooves gliding silently above the rooftops. There, at the corner of a quiet street where the snow had drifted high against a brick wall, I saw her. She was no more than 10 or 11, with a coat too thin for the weather and shoes that had seen too many winters. Her hair stuck out from under a knitted cap that had lost its shape long ago. In one hand, she held a little bundle of matchboxes, tied together with a string. In the other, she cupped her fingers and blew on them, trying to coax a bit of warmth into skin turning red with cold. She walked from door to door, her boots crunching softly. At each house, he would climb the steps, reach for the brass knocker, and then hesitate. Through the window, she could see a family gathered around a table, or a tree glittering with ornaments, or a fire leaping in the hearth. She would stand very still for a moment, watching, and then quietly back away without knocking. "Matches for sale," she whispered once, almost too softly for her own ears. "Good matches, only a few coins." No one heard. I brought the sleigh down on the flat roof of a nearby building and stepped to the edge, looking down. She moved slowly along the street, clutching the matches like a shield, her breath visible in the air. Her name was Anya. She had not always been the match seller in her own mind. Once, not so long ago, she had simply been a little girl who helped her mother knead bread and chase dust from corners and fetch water from the pump. Her father had worked at the docks, carrying crates and barrels, strong and sure-footed even in the rain and snow. Their little room had been small, certainly, and the floor sometimes creaked when the wind blew hard, but there had been laughter there, and songs, and the smell of soup on cold evenings. Then her father's work had dried up with the closing of a warehouse. The coins that rattled in his pocket became fewer. The landlord's voice at the door became sharper. The winter came early that year, as if trying to crowd autumn off the calendar. "I will help," Anya had said, and she meant it. She ran errands. She carried bundles. She offered to sweep steps for neighbors. A kind woman at the corner shop had given her a little crate of matches. "Try to sell these," she'd said gently. "You can keep part of what you earn." So Anya became the match seller, whether she liked the title or not. Her mother had wrapped her in the only coat they had, pressing a kiss to her forehead. "Just a few hours," she had said. "Then home. I'll keep the soup warm." It all sounded sensible and simple, standing by the stove. It felt very different now, alone on the street with the wind pushing at her back like a cold hand. She reached the end of the row of houses and turned into a narrower lane, where the lights were fewer and the snow lay deeper. Here, the grand windows gave way to smaller ones, cracked in places, shaded with thin curtains. She stood under a street lamp, its light pale and uncertain, and looked at the matches in her hand. "No one wants them," she murmured. "Who needs matches when they already have fires?" A gust of wind answered with a low whistle through the alley. Her fingers ached. Her toes felt dull and far away, as if they were someone else's. She leaned her back against the wall and slid down until she was sitting on the small patch of dry stone where the snow had not quite reached. Just for a moment, she thought. Just until I can feel my legs again. From my place on the rooftop, I watched her curl herself small against the cold, like a leaf trying to hide from winter. I could have moved on. I had many houses yet to visit, many chimneys to descend, but there is more to my work than parcels and ribbons, and I knew that if I left her there without trying, I would remember the sight of her for many years afterward. So I climbed down. You must understand, I do not always appear the way people expect. Sometimes I'm only a feeling, a thought, a sudden idea that arrives like a spark. Sometimes I'm a stranger with a kind word, or a memory that rises at exactly the right moment. That night, in that alley, I let myself be seen as an old man in a thick coat, with a beard that caught the light like frost, carrying a walking stick that tapped softly on the stones. Cold night to be out selling matches, I said quietly as I came near. Anya startled, sitting up straighter. Her first instinct was caution. Children on the streets learn that quickly. But something in my voice made her shoulders loosen just a little. I haven't sold any, she admitted. No one needs them. Everyone already has candles and fires. I sat down on the edge of a crate across from her, at a respectful distance. The snow fell between us, tiny flakes spinning. Is that what you think matches are for? I asked. Only for people who already have warmth? She frowned, puzzled. What else are they for? For starting new fires, I said. For sharing light where there is none. For turning dark corners into places where you can see one another's faces. She looked down at the little bundle. They're just matches, she whispered, and I am just me. Just you, I repeated. Tell me about just you. She hesitated, then spoke in a rush. I used to help my mother bake bread, she said. I can braid dough so it looks like a rope. I know how to patch socks. I can carry 2 buckets of water without spilling too much. I can remember stories my father told me about ships on the river. And I can walk all the way from our room to the market without slipping once if I step where the stones are roughest. She stopped, embarrassed. None of that sells matches, she muttered. I smiled. It does, I said, but not in the way you think. Duh. Another gust of wind slipped into the alley. She shivered and pulled her coat tighter. I could see her lips turning pale. May I buy one? I asked. Her head snapped up. One match? Yes, one match. I have something I'd like to show you. She fumbled with the string, her fingers clumsy from the cold, and pulled out a tiny box. She opened it, revealing the small row of wooden sticks, each with its little head of red. I took one carefully. Now, I said, if I strike this and we hold it close, what will happen? It will burn, she said, for a moment, then it will go out. Yes, I agreed, but while it burns, what will we see? She watched as I drew the match along the rough side of the box. There was that familiar hiss, and suddenly a small, determined flame flared to life, bright enough to paint gold on the snowflakes. We will see each other, I said. For a few precious seconds, the light filled the space between us. In that glow, I saw her clearly. The curve of her cheek, the smudge of soot near her ear, the stubborn set of her mouth. She saw my eyes and the lines at their corners, the kindness there, the attention. She blinked. It's warmer, she whispered. A little, I said. Not enough for the whole winter, but enough to remind you what warmth feels like. The flame shrank and died, leaving a faint ribbon of smoke. Could you do that again? I asked. Not for me, for someone else. Her brow furrowed. Who? The people behind those small windows, I said, nodding toward the darker end of the lane. Not everyone in this city has a big fire and a full table, but not everyone has thought to knock on their door with a bit of light. Anya thought about the woman 3 doors down from her own building, the one who hardly ever came out, whose husband had gone away to look for work and had not yet returned. She thought of the old man at the corner who always sat by his window with a blanket over his knees, watching the street as if watching a memory. She thought about the family with 3 small children who lived in the basement room below theirs, whose stove had broken last week. Would they buy matches? She asked. Maybe, I said. But even if they don't, you will have offered something more than wood and sulfur. You will have offered a visit, a conversation, a spark. She looked down at her box again. The matches were the same as before, short and plain, but they did not seem quite so small now. "If I do that," she said slowly, "will it be enough? My mother needs money for rent, and flour for bread, and coal for the stove." I reached into my coat and drew out a handful of coins, not so many that they would make her question the miracle, but enough to make a difference. "For tonight," I said, placing them gently in her palm, "let this be the price of the match you just sold me, and perhaps the price of a few matches you will give away." Her eyes widened. "This for one match?" "For the light," I said, "and for what you will do with it." Her fingers closed around the coins as if afraid they might disappear. Her eyes shone suddenly with more than the reflection of a little flame. She stood up, feeling warmth returning to her legs along with purpose. "Go on," I said. "There is still time before midnight." She nodded. "Will I see you again?" she asked. "In some way," I said. "Every time you strike a match for someone who needs a bit of light, I will know." She did not fully understand, but she smiled anyway, a small, genuine smile that made her look, for a moment, like the girl in the old photograph on her mother's shelf. Then, she turned and walked toward the nearest dark window. I watched her knock gently, heard the hesitant footsteps inside, saw the door open just a crack. I saw her hold up her little box and say, "Matches, ma'am, but I could also sit with you a moment, if you're alone." That night, Anya sold a few matches, yes. But more than that, she shared their flames. In one room, she lit a candle for a lonely widow and told her a funny story her father had once told at the supper table, and they laughed together. In another, she sat with the old man and listened as he talked and talked and talked, the way people do when someone finally asks them how they are. In the basement room, she helped the tired mother light a tiny fire in a cracked stove and sang a song to the smallest child while the others warmed their toes. By the time she returned home, the coins I had given her had been joined by others, small offerings pressed into her hand by those who had more gratitude than change to spare. Her mother met her at the door, worry turning quickly to astonishment when she saw what Anya held out. "Where did you—" "From people who needed matches," Anya said, "and company." Her mother pulled her into a tight embrace, money and matches and all. The soup on the stove was thin, but they shared it gladly. Their room was still small, their challenges still large, but something in that space had shifted. There was a new warmth there, the kind that even the coldest wind cannot quite reach. In the years that followed, the city changed. New shops opened, old buildings were repaired, children grew taller and stronger, and if you had walked those streets at Christmas time, you might have noticed something curious. In the older quarter, when the lamps were lit and the snow fell softly, people would say, "Ah, here comes the match seller," when they saw a girl and later a young woman moving from door to door, not begging, not just selling, but checking on those behind the dimmest windows. She became, in time, a woman known not just for her matches, but for her visits, her listening, her habit of showing up where loneliness was thickest. And though her hands eventually learned other work, better work, steadier work, she never quite lost the smell of burnt wood from her coat or the understanding that even the smallest flame can change a night. So if, this Christmas, you feel small, like a single match in a winter full of wind, remember Anya. Remember that what you carry may look ordinary, an hour of your time, a kind word, a visit, a phone call, but in the right hands, at the right moment, it can be light and warmth and hope. I will be out there, as I always am, flying over streets bright and dim, and when I see someone striking a tiny match of kindness in a cold corner of the world, I will think of the little match seller in her thin coat, and I will smile. Merry Christmas, my friend. May you never underestimate the light you hold, and may you always find someone who needs it.